Hi, I'm Isabella, and this is my timeline of disability rights. So, first we have the eugenics movement in 1883, and this created a series of laws that prevented people with disabilities from marrying, having children, or migrating to this country. This law also resulted in institutionalizing and forced sterilization of those with disabilities. And I included a picture of a newspaper that says heredity is the big problem. So that's kind of the mindset of what they had in the 1800s, or like the late 1800s. My next key date I have is after World War One, Congress passed funding for rehabilitation of soldiers, and this included training, counseling, um, and it was known as the Fess-Smith Civilian Vocational Rehabilitation Act. So a lot of the general public had disabilities due to the war, and this was providing them with money for rehab. Next, I have in 1927 the court case Buck v. Bell. This rules that forced sterilization of people with disabilities is not a violation of the Constitution. So, the justice that ruled this decision compared sterilization to vaccination, and this would eventually lead to over 60,000 people being sterilized by the 1970s. In 1933, FDR was elected president, and he was the first president with a significant disability. He was in a wheelchair, and many of the pictures he was taken at a desk, and this like hid his wheelchair. But like this is still a huge milestone for the disabled community that it shows that someone in a wheelchair could be president. He created Social Security, and this is a form of permanent assistance for those with disabilities. So this was a huge milestone because this would provide funding for people with disabilities for the rest of like their lives, as we still use it today. In 1972, education was expanding for those with disabilities, such as the two court cases Mill v. Board of Education, ruling that Washington, D.C. cannot exclude children with disabilities from public school, and Park v. Pennsylvania, kind of saying the same thing. Um, Also in 1972, another thing was Willowbrook closed down, which is the institution that we learned about during this class. It was a horrible institution that really didn't take care of the patients who were people with disabilities. So the TV broadcast that we actually watched in this class kind of helped this New York win this court case to close down Willowbrook because the public was so involved. The thousands of people who were institutionalized moved into community-based living. Then in 1973, another Rehabilitation Act happened. So this received federal funds. As you can see in these two pictures, they were actually from people protesting for the Rehabilitation Act. So this says support 504, and this says we shall overcome. Also, what I found was interesting on the websites that I was looking at is that the first handicap parking stickers were found in 1973. So, like, this is a really big milestone for disability rights because being able to park closer to wherever they have to go is a really big milestone for disability rights. In 1975, the IDEA was enacted. So it was originally named the Education for All Handicapped Children, and then it was eventually renamed the IDEA, and it guarantees free and appropriate education for all students in a least restrictive environment. This was a really big act. I'm an education major, and I'm hoping to go into special education. And we still learn about this act. It created all students an opportunity to go to school, and the least restrictive environment means that a child with disabilities has to be placed in the general education with their peers as much as possible. The Fair Housing Amendment Act in 1998, so this act includes people with disabilities and has them be protected and offered housing. So this also established like multiple dwelling buildings had to have like ramps and railings. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, this was a huge milestone that we learned about throughout this course. We learned that there was the Capitol crawl, so over 60 activists got out of their wheelchairs and climbed the steps of the Capitol building to symbolize the hardships that they face and to push for the ADA. This would eventually lead to President George Bush signing this act, and this mandates that all government programs must be accessible. All businesses have to be like accommodating for those with disabilities, and public transportation also must be accessible. In 2006, disability rights in school, this bill required K through 12 public schools teach the history of disability rights movement. This was passed due to the efforts of 20 young activists in West Virginia. I was unaware of this, and I don't remember learning it in K through 12 during my school, so I'm curious to see how this would affect me as a teacher and how this affects students and what they learn. In 2011, AMC Movie Theaters explains that they would be able to provide closed captioning to any movie. And I'm surprised that it took up to 2011 because closed captioning is something that should be accessible to all people. I've also never been to a movie theater that used closed captioning, so I thought that this was interesting. And then in 2012, so a year later, Netflix provides closed captioning to all TVs and movies. And when I was researching, I learned that this happened after a lawsuit, so it's kind of disheartening that it took a lawsuit for Netflix to provide closed captioning. And then I ended on a positive note. In 2015, New York City had its first Disability Pride Parade. And I wanted to end with this because it really shows how far we've come, that in the beginning stages of disability rights, it was all about fighting for rights and getting small like accomplishments, and I wanted to end with something that was just all about positivity, like a pride parade, and there's more that people could do to fight for rights for all individuals, and it's really interesting to me to see how far we've come. And here's my references.